Hello and welcome back to another episode of League Talk, the podcast about management, coaching, performance, and all things League of Legends. My name is AJ, and on today's podcast, we have a play-by-play caster and host, more recently, BP. So welcome, thank you so much for your time. Why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself?
Well, as you just said, I'm Oisin BP Malloy. I'm Irish, 26. I nearly forgot my own age there for a second. I've been casting for about best part of 6 years, and now I'm here. That's kind of the easiest way I can put it.
Super. So did you? I'm super interested in your journey into esports as well. So casting is a really unusual one that we will get into a little bit later. But what was your sort of first foray into esports?
So my first foray was I think it was back in 2009. Would have been 2009, 2010. Gears of War 3 came out, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up my own ass, but I was very good. I was a very good Gears of War 3 player. I got an opportunity to play professionally for a little bit with a team called Virtus Pro at the time. Played that, and that was kind of like the initial kind of foray into esports. Of just kind of like, all right, I like this. I get to play video games, and this is really fun. So, and then from there, where League of Legends kind of started was season 2. Watched the World Championships, fell in love with the game, was terrible at it, still am terrible at it. So when I realized I couldn't be a pro player in League of Legends, I kind of moved over to the side of casting a little bit, and that was kind of my introduction, if you will, to kind of say like, right, you're not good at playing it, but you can talk about it, and that's the more important thing. That's how I started.
Good stuff. Because we'll talk about actually, as I said, getting into casting and what that was like for you a little bit later. But the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about was EU Masters. Now, EU Masters has just recently finished, which was a really interesting tournament. Always is, and it's always, now more than ever, I feel. And I've been watching League of Legends for 4 or 5 years probably. This is the first time that I feel like EU Masters has been heralded as the real step to go, the stepping stone for LEC, and I think that's a really nice way for the pathway of professional esports to be looking. But for you personally, how was it being back on the EU Masters caster's desk?
It was great. I love casting European League of Legends. Obviously, it's where I started. Very, very much low down on bronze to gold, Irish scene games where, still have them on my friends list because I had to organize the tournaments and everything and admin them. But I love EU Masters for what it is. And I think, like you said, after the EU Masters Spring, where I think 7 out of the 10 players who were in the finals ended up in LEC the next split, that's insane. And it really shows that the wealth of talent we have within Europe. It's not perfect. It is not a perfect system, of course. There are some, flaws with it, of course. But I do think it is, at the moment, the best kind of tier 2 tournament in League of Legends. It is a fantastic display of, local, kind of up and coming talents. Anyone, old guards like White Knight and such on Big, who are kind of like, well, we were, old LEC. We still got it, and I really love it. I think it's a fantastic tournament.
Amazing. How many times have you done EU Masters prior to that?
My first endeavor on it, well, funny enough, I've actually done 3. The first time I did it, I was an observer. That was the first EU Masters at 2018. I was an observer, and I learned a hell of a lot from the guys there, Quickshot, Medic, and all the fantastic greats of LEC who were working on it. And then missed out in summer 2018. Then I came back and I was casting this year, spring 19, and then I casted again for summer 19.
Amazing. Very, very nice. Because so this tournament, the previous one was Misfits Premier who won, and they were in the play-ins, weren't they? And then ended up winning. And this time, it was Big, one of the German teams. Before the tournament started, what did you think? Did you think that they were going to win? When you were looking at the tournament early doors? What was your thoughts on the whole scene from the team standpoint?
I thought Big definitely had a pretty good chance. I will be honest, I did not peg them to win the whole thing. I had, I think, Mouse Sports, and I think I had XL as my top 2 teams. As a personal thing, but they went from strength to strength throughout the entire tournament, and it's been shown quite a few times now with Misfits Premier, now obviously with Big, that play-in sets you up very, very nicely for groups, which kind of gives you a nice little running start to kind of go, all right, we've gotten all our cobwebs off us, we've gotten all the rust off, let's just keep going, let's keep the gears moving. So it's awesome to see twice in a row now the play-ins teams have kind of usurped their #1 seeds from their regions and kind of said, no, we're better than you. And even in Big's case, where they literally beat Mouse in the semi-final to get to the top, is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you do take that risk, and I think people used to talk about Cloud9 at Worlds for this exact reason, sort of thing, where you take that risk of potentially going out in the play-ins, but you get 8-10 games of actual practice, like real competitive practice, comparative to what scrims can be like, which
exactly
is a bit different, isn't it? And funny you mentioned XL was one of the top 2 teams there. I had Tim Kiro, who is XL's coach, the academy coach, and he thought the top 4 would be XL, Fnatic, Mouse. I can't remember the last one, but interesting. The point that I want to take away from that is 2 of those teams in the top 4 he thought would be UK. And I genuinely, I'm a part of UK League of Legends as well. This is where the podcast sort of started off. But I thought, looking at the 2 UK teams, they could really go the distance. So when XL got knocked out early, I was, well, not early, but earlier than I thought anyway. I was really surprised. But I'm interested to see your takes on the British teams. What were you thinking? Obviously, you said XL were going to be up there, but Fnatic XL, what were your thoughts going in?
I actually did think I did an article or did an interview for an article on All Esports where they were asking me about pretty much the same question of like, who do you think is going to win the whole thing? I actually thought this would be UK's kind of split. I felt like they kind of were coming in with a lot of momentum behind them, you know, taking it seriously. I do think that kind of Fnatic, though all individually fantastic players, I felt like they were kind of missing a key role, which was support, unfortunately for them. They were kind of chopping and changing a lot, and though that can work sometimes, it's better to have a dedicated support, so that's where they fell short. For XL, I was a little disappointed in them, but I still think that, you know, overall, I think, you know, this has been the most successful UK run as a whole for the 2 teams. You're having 2 teams in the top 8. You know, I think it was a fantastic campaign for them. You know, it's just kind of, I wouldn't know as a coach's perspective where the next kind of step is. You know, how do you move forward from top 4 to top 2 to potentially winning it?
Yeah, interesting, because the UK League itself is, for me, a very interesting one, because there's such disparity. I don't know how much you followed it, or maybe had a look at it going into EU Masters, but there's such disparity between literally the top 2 teams. It's
very top heavy. It's very top heavy. I was on board with the feel and hype train, though. I wasn't with the gauntlet run. I was like, go on.
Well, they're Irish as well, so maybe that's
an Irish org, yeah. But I was like when they won the first game, I was like, all right, they're fine. And the second game, I was like, oh, interesting. And then I was like, oh my god, they could do it. They could do it. But we all love it. We all love an underdog story.
For sure. So if you were looking back on EU Masters, then what were your thoughts overall on the tournament? As expected, you were really happy with your performance. However you have a look at that, what were your thoughts looking back?
I think as a tournament itself, I do think that the results were kind of expected, but I don't think any region played poorly. I think actually the Italies, the Portugals, the Beneluxes, the kind of what would be considered minor regions definitely came out, and I feel like they, you know, similar to you know, kind of a lot of different tournaments where the expected results came in, but not the expected journey. It was kind of like a couple of different games where we're like, oh Jesus, that could have went wrong for this team, and that could have went great for that team. And I feel like a lot of the minor regions are definitely leveling up, which is fantastic to see. For me personally, you know, I love working with the guys. The team that we had were super passionate. Great to have Veteran on as well. Veteran is kind of his wealth of knowledge was incredible. So overall, I do think that it was kind of I would say like a very good peak of kind of like good European talent, kind of like all amateur for the first time. We didn't have any kind of, you know, LEC casters, or, you know, as much as they're great to have, it was like very much like a full kind of like up and coming caster list. And I personally very much enjoyed it.
Good news. Glad to hear it, because I think it's for fans alike, it's a very, very fun tournament to watch, especially as it sort of fills that gap in between like most of the seasons finishing and then World starting. It like stops.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, you spoke about the team and you spoke about the casters and all that sort of stuff. In my opinion, casting is one of the roles that's massively overlooked. You hear, I don't know if you've tuned into Euphoria, the podcast that they do for the LEC, and it's always for me very interesting to hear people like Froskeer and talking about how much, like, not abuse may be the wrong word, but flame maybe is the right word, how much sort of you guys tank just abuse at certain times for and it's especially true for really good casters, because I think that's even more to be overlooked, because you don't really realise what they're doing. And I think when people try and step into the shoes of a caster, I think you would, you know, start to realise what it can be. it's easy sometimes to see a poor caster, but not someone who's doing really well. But firstly, how and why did you choose to go down the route of casting?
For me, it was I love League of Legends. I'm very passionate about it. I won't lie and say that I know everything about the game, but I just fell in love with the personalities behind it, the storylines, the history of it. And I saw this as a game. Lo and behold, it has become that. It could go on a lot longer than your average video game kind of you're seeing. And I think why I loved casting it was that I loved the energy. I love, like, when I'm watching World's Finals season 2, it was the passion and the energy of like, this guy's excited, I'm excited, and that I loved bringing that. I love that entertainment factor that people brought, and to me, that's like the be all and end all. It's like, you're watching a football match, you're watching a rugby match, you're watching anything, and if the commentator is excited, you're excited.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
I was watching Japan Ireland last week, and unfortunately we lost, but I was excited for Japan because I was just like, this guy is like, this is the Irish commentary, but he's going in like, oh my God, Japan are going to do this. And I was just like, oh my God, they're going to do it. Like, and you fall in love with those storylines. And I think that's what I loved about it so much, and why I followed it so much, was that from anyone from bronze, from like, I remember one guy reached out to me years ago, and he was like, this is before I did any kind of actual paid casting. And he was like, can you like spectate and then cast my promos to gold, from silver to gold? And he went 2-2, and then he had like one last game, and he did it, and like we had about 150 viewers, like everyone was going nuts.
Wow.
And I was just like, you can make anything entertaining, and I love that. I love that energy behind it, and I think that's why I chose casting as such. The one thing I will say about casting, like you were saying, is that it's very, very easy for people to spot bad casting, but it's very hard for people to spot good casting. So I always Frost Current's a fantastic example, because I always notice that when she is 100% on her game, point to point, like absolutely perfect, no one says a word. No one says anything. No one even mentions her. Like, she's just like nothing on the radar. She makes one little flub on one little rotation, or the smallest of mistakes, and everyone just jumps on her. They really go on an attack. And I've seen that on multiple different people, specifically, the higher you go, the more likely you are to kind of meet these challenges. But I kind of take that as part and parcel with the job description, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the other things that LEC casters will always be doomed by, and maybe this is something that you experience in your time working as well, is once people find like a fan favorite caster, and the perfect example I think is Quickshot and Deficio, right? These two are loved. No matter what they do, it seems like it's like perfect. The fans absolutely adore them as in their role. And once someone is casting more than them, or like, I know that Quickshot took a step back and is working more behind the scenes a little bit, and obviously Deficio's with Origin. When this happens, you're always going to try to fill the shoes of someone who's perfect in the eyes of the public, and that seems to me like something that's so difficult for casters to overcome once they've got that fan favorite as a
like a good example right now is Papa Smithy in LCK. Is like, he's leaving, and now they have to replace it with somebody, and unfortunately they don't like change. No one likes change, even though it's like, we all kind of say like, oh, we love something different. We don't. We love constant. We love routine. And I think that's a big issue when it comes to casters, because whoever takes that role is unfortunately going to be left with a situation of, you have to be Papa Smithy 2.0. And if you're not, we hate you. And Papa Smithy had the exact same thing when Monte Cristo and Doa left. He had to be Monte Cristo 2.0. And then when he wasn't, for the first like year and a half, everyone was just like, this guy sucks. We hate this guy. And then eventually he just said, no, I'm going to keep my head down, do my thing, do me, be Papa Smithy, not be Monty. And I hope whoever does get it kind of gets that bit of advice as well, of like, don't try to be Papa Smithy, be yourself, be you. And like, if you're really looking towards this and you're really pushing for it, you should be able to kind of, drive it home.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's super interesting about Papa Smithy is quite how much work he openly talks about goes into his casts, right?
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure it's the same for everyone. I'm sure this isn't one of these things where you come up to EU Masters and you're like, yeah, whatever, I'm ready, let's go. I'm sure there's like hours of work, much like what Papa Smithy talks about, and he watches VODs and all these different things, and it just seems like so much effort has to go into each and every cast. That's an admirable trait that you guys put through as well.
Yeah, it kind of comes, as I said, it comes part and parcel with the if you're bad, people will notice.
Yeah,
So you can't be bad.
Yeah. So for when you're getting into casting, one of the big questions for a wannabe caster, maybe is the right way to put it, is what type of caster you're going to be, right? So you are a play-by-play caster. And for those who don't know, would you mind just going through explaining what a play-by-play is comparative to colour, and why you chose to go down? Maybe you've mentioned it a little bit about the game knowledge sort of thing, but why that was your choice as well.
So for me, I'll explain what it. Play-by-play caster is the what as such of a cast. It's what is happening on your screen right now. The color caster, which is usually paired up, one or two of them, is why and how. It's why it happened, how it's happening, and what is going to happen because of it. I feel like of the two, I would argue that the play-by-play is actually a little easier, mainly because you have a lot more room for flavor. You have a lot more room to kind of show your personality, be yourself, and you get to be the one to make the really hype calls and make the really cool, like the clip bits, the bits that they put in hype videos, which is really fun. I chose play-by-play. Straight up, I just do not have enough game knowledge. And I had already spent so much time just trying to get to a certain level in the game that I was like, I'm not personally willing to put in endless hours and I think it's more of a like the nitty gritty. Like I know about basics and kind of that level of knowledge, but when it comes to like veteran level or Frostgurn level of knowledge or Papa Smithy, it just kind of overwhelms me quite a bit. So I said I would focus more on the kind of entertainment factor, if you will, of the cast rather than the actual analysis.
Interesting, because I think people underlook play-by-play as well, right? Because when it goes silent, that's like, BP, it's up to you now. You've got to fill that gap. That's sort of your job. So that's really interesting. But I can imagine from what you've said there as well, casting is a difficult thing to learn and get better at. Much like other professions in esports, the pathways to success, the pathways to improvement aren't necessarily blatantly obvious. I've spoken about this many a times with coaches and things like that. It's like there's no one single pathway that's you go through. Like in tennis, we have the LTA, and in football, we have the FA. There's no single, like, this is how you become a coach. Same with casters, right? So how do you go about honing your craft and getting better at casting? The thing that you said that was really interesting, maybe you can speak to this, was those silver, those gold games that you were casting on the side sort of thing.
Yeah, well, for me personally, as you said, it's literally different for every single person. There is no kind of one way to do it. Everyone has their own kind of setups and kind of ways they go about things. For me personally, it was always, I need to make this interesting to anybody who watches, and entertaining is like, whether or not it is analytically correct or the most proper play or whatever way you want to put it, it doesn't matter to me personally. I would always go with I want to make this entertaining. How do I go about this entertaining? So for me personally, for practice or anything like that, I watch every single esport known to man. I watch fighting games. I watch Rocket League, Overwatch, shooters, chess. You try and watch as much as you physically can, because there are so many different things that I feel like every single caster can bring into a cast. And what might not work in one sense, like fighting game community, might just be exclusively to the big massive shout outs or something like that. Someone like Raz over in the LPL has actually honed that in, and he's actually taken that little element of fighting game, kind of casting, and said, right, this is now part of my casting. You can kind of piece together bits and bobs. I will say that when you the higher you go in terms of casting, the less people there are to guide you. There are less kind of examples, and even then, like the people who I would look towards for advice or anything like that, the quick shots, the medics, the Dracoses, they're very busy people. They're very, very busy. So it's very difficult to even kind of get them for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and go, right, we're gonna sit down here and we're gonna chat about this, because they just have they have a million and one other things to do. And I think for play-by-play, the big thing for me is being entertaining. It's being, kind of having a narrative, having a storyline, and making sure that even if someone's not like watching the game, like actually watching with their eyes, and they're only just listening, they can still understand what's going on.
For sure. Because obviously you spoke about loads of other esports, and you spoke earlier about the Japan versus Ireland game. Did you start to sort of sit down and every time you hear someone commentate on a traditional sports game, or every time you hear someone who's talking about Rocket League, for example, are you sort of like analysing the situation? That's like, oh, that cast, I see how he's done that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit of a curse, unfortunately. It's like I kind of listen to everything, and I'm kind of like, oh, I love how he did that, and everyone's like, what are you talking about? And I'm just like, oh, nothing. Shut up, leave me alone. I'm doing my thing. But yeah, it is kind of, unfortunately, when you follow it as a career, you just have to, you find yourself involuntarily just kind of like analyzing everything, thinking about it, saying like, oh, that could have been better there. It's like, oh no, I like that. I like quite a lot. I wonder how this would work. And you push it a lot harder, and it can be fun if you're in a group of casters and you're all doing it, because you're all like, this is like a group project. But if it's just you and you're a bunch of your mates and you're watching the Japan-Ireland game, and I turn around and kind of say, you never get that in esports, and they look at me and kind of go, this conversation happened in your head. What are you talking about?
Brilliant. But have you learned from traditional sports as well? Were you much of a traditional sports guy, or was it esports?
A big traditional sports guy. I love rugby. Rugby is my bread and butter. I am not a big guy. I was a winger in schools rugby for years. I was get ball and run. That was kind of my whole deal. But I love watching it. I loved, I love just kind of sports in general. I love competitiveness. I'm very competitive in my own right, but sometimes to my detriment. But I think that like when I always kind of compare like esports and sports in a commentary kind of point of view, is that the play-by-plays, or the play-by-plays in traditional sports, don't tell you every single little thing that's going on. And I feel like that's something that we're going to eventually get to in esports, is that like, so if I watch, the Ireland, perfect example, Ireland, Japan, is like, they'll see a couple of tackles. They don't go, Keen Healy tackles, this guy, that guy goes down, he goes in for the ruck. It's like, whereas in League of Legends, we do that quite a lot. It's, he flashes away, he comes in with the Q, and we're kind of trying to build it from that. So something I hope that we do kind of transition towards a little bit more towards is that kind of less information, but just kind of keeping the relevant information kind of key to the thing. Because I love... one of the best calls, I think, was from the Japan-Ireland game, from what I've seen anyway, in terms of commentary. It's like, it breaks 1 tackle, 2 tackles, 3 tackles, and like you can feel him getting excited, but he hasn't told us who he's broken through. Whereas in League of Legends, it would be kind of like, this person died, that person died, and they're constantly kind of updating it as such.
Yeah. Very difficult thing to do, though, isn't it? To really hone in on the most important things. Because that's a skill. That's not something
you need to know your game pretty damn well.
Yeah, for sure. So when you're getting ready for a cast, and maybe this happened a little bit over EU Masters as well, do you have any sort of pre-game rituals, any warm-ups, or anything like that to get you ready for the cast?
I listen to music for about 20 minutes before we go live. Just kind of really pumpy music, real kind of like energy filling, and kind of, do a couple of jumps on the spot and kind of get the blood flowing and stuff like that. It's like, because like, as I said, like if I'm excited, the viewer's excited. And it doesn't matter if it's like people are like, oh, well, that was just the wrong play, or that was this, or that was that. It's like, for me, it's like you're excited, and that's all that matters. So I build my own energy from that. I kind of try and build my co-caster's energy and kind of say, right, if I jump off an excitement cliff, you got to catch me and not just be monotone. Which is also kind of my fault. I shouldn't put that on my co-caster, but yeah, like I think for me, it's building energy, it's building hype, it's kind of getting myself in the headset or the head space of I want this to be exciting, therefore I have to be excited.
Of course. Is there anything like I can't remember who I saw this was. I think again it was from EU where they were talking about what they would do is they would literally recite a rap song, and it was one of like. It was like an Eminem song or something like that.
Eminem Rap God. That is a trick that Quickshot has told a lot of people. It's very good. I do a lot of tongue twisters. I think Rap God is good because it gets you hyped as well, because you can kind of go like, oh God, I just Rap God. That's amazing. But I think for me personally, I don't like using a script, because in my head it's like I'm never gonna have that script for a cast. For me it's like, yes, you know how to rap God, fantastic, but you're never going to use that in a cast. And that's just me personally, that's just a personal thing for me. I'm sure it helps quite a few people. It would not be a tried and tested kind of setup if it wasn't used so often, but for me it's kind of, I'll just pick a load of random tongue twisters just to get my R's and my T's and make sure like there's nothing getting lost in translation, because sometimes my Irish accent comes out pretty thick.
See, this is the other really interesting thing, and maybe you're experiencing the Irish accent coming out a bit more in this scenario. But obviously, you have been at EU Masters. Prior to that, you said you were doing lots of other little jobs here and there. But you're actually working in China now.
Yes.
So on the LPL, the last split at least, you've been doing the English broadcast for China, basically. Which is a bizarre one to me. It's super bizarre for me because it's like it's so other. It's not something that you generally see a lot of, you know. But how did you manage to make your way out there and getting the role in the LPL?
So they reached out to me just after spring split this year, and they kind of emailed me and said, "Hey, don't suppose you're free for X amount of weeks? We really like your casting. We'd love to have you over here on this." And don't get me wrong, it was a tough decision to make. China is a crazy culture shock. It is an interesting country, and that's as far as I'm going to take that conversation. But it is very much like you know, you can sink or swim. You know, you can push for it really hard. You can get what you want from it, and you know, kind of push for it if you like it. But for me, it was they offered it to me. I'd always wanted it. It was always a dream of mine to cast for a premier region. Regardless of if it was Europe, China, Korea, NA, doesn't matter. So for me, it was kind of, I do this for 2019, and if it goes well, fantastic, I can keep doing it. If it doesn't, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I can go home happy saying, look, I did this. We're all good. I think that was the kind of the big thing for me, and it was great. The guys were super accommodating. All the talent there, Hysterics, Raz, Clements, were fantastic. Everyone treated me as if like we were best friends for ages, even though we've only met each other like a week or two before that, and it worked out very, very well. I'm back in Ireland right now, so I'm taking Worlds at home because I was just like I need to go home and have a little bit of a rest. But yeah, China was great. I think it was just I grinded my absolute life out of me. I pushed for every single possible thing. And it helped as well because at the time I was actually working as stats operator for LEC. So I was working for them for Spring Split, and I was able to kind of, obviously from them, Quickshot might have reached out to Quickshot and said, "Hey, have you got anyone in mind?" And he might have been like, "Hey, this guy." And you know, you don't really know exactly how it works, but it definitely helped being around the people that can kind of help out in those situations.
Amazing. Well, so what's a stats operator then? Is that the graphics and things like that? You
graphics, any kind of quick stat, any kind of, you know, quick little tidbit of information. It's constantly feeding the casters with stuff, and you know, if they want to check something like when was the last time a champion was played, when was the last time they played this champion, how did that matchup go, any crazy stat like, you know, Reckless getting 1,000 kills or something like that, you know, career kills. There's a lot of different small little bits of information that just add flavor to a caster. It's kind of, best way I put it was like we were the ammunition to a caster's gun. We were just giving them as much as they possibly could. If they wanted to use it, awesome, they can use it, no issues whatsoever. If they didn't, doesn't matter.
Amazing. See, that's really interesting because that to me seems like what you're doing and what you have done really well is adding loads and loads of different strings to your bow. That actually, that probably understanding how the stats work and understanding when is the right time to feed it to the caster is probably really beneficial for your casts as well, right? It's different perspectives all the way around.
I worked at quite a few odd jobs in LEC. I was an observer for LEC in summer 2018. I was the teleprompter scroll person, so I just had to scroll the text down on the thing, and that was it. Like, it was nothing else. I was stats operator. I learned a wealth of knowledge from the guys at LEC, and it made me just like you just said, like appreciate and kind of get a different perspective of a lot of different stuff that happens behind the scenes. And every time something goes wrong in LEC or anytime something goes wrong in LCS, I'm always just like, I know it's not the caster's fault, but whose fault is it? And I'm like looking into it, like thinking through my mind of like, who's responsible for that?
Brilliant. Because, you know, what you were doing in China wasn't just casting, you were also hosting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the first time that I really like tuned into the LPL in a major way was not the group stages, the lead up to Worlds basically. The name evades me, but when you had SOAS on the desk as well, and that sort of time was the first time that I'd really concentrated on the LPL.
Playoff weekend.
Playoffs, there you go.
Yeah.
I was watching that quite intently for a while actually, but what's it like casting and hosting? Are there massive differences? Is it much of the same? From your standpoint, what are the big sort of changes?
They're two incredibly different skill sets. Right. I learned a lot. I appreciated a lot of what Quickshot and Shocks and Dash do now because it was hard. It's very, very hard, especially when you have... I had Nelson and Soaz, who were fantastic. I love them. They were fantastic, and I love them both. But they weren't native talent, and not having that native talent to kind of lean on to kind of help you with certain things is difficult. And it was definitely a learning curve for me. And it was intense. I had never casted or been in a stadium that large where the crowd were going crazy behind us, and I had to like kind of keep my head on and kind of go, don't get distracted. You have like the crowd behind you, your producer in your ear, you're trying to ask a question, you're trying to listen to their answer so you can make sure. There's a lot of different stuff going on at the same time. I have a huge appreciation for what hosts do, because it is not easy. But it was incredibly fun. I was incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to kind of go for it as well, which was great. And yeah, I really liked it. It was really something different that I wasn't, kind of. It was out of my comfort zone.
Do you think that's something that you'd carry on doing, hosting, if the opportunity does arise? Not necessarily in the LPL, but just generally speaking.
I'd love to. I'd love to be able to kind of push that boat out a bit further. It was a lot of fun. I think, a great host is a host that says very little, and what I mean by that is that you're kind of a great host is someone who, in my opinion, can get their guests to give them all the information without necessarily kind of like lining up the question for the very set answer. It's and I think I look towards Get Frankie, Shocks, Dash, Quickshot. They're all incredibly good at setting themselves up and setting up their guests to be able to kind of give them the platform and say, you guys do you. And I would love to kind of hone that in a bit more and try and push myself a bit further.
Sounds good. Because the other thing, obviously, you said we'll leave the conversation there about the culture shock, and I don't want to talk about culture in that sense, but more to do with the way that the culture of League of Legends is set up in China, because it is very, very different, right? And that's one thing that you might have noticed with the stadium there, because I've seen bits and bobs out of Travis Gafford, who did some videos to do with China and how that works. What was it like going into the stadium comparative to EU Masters, which isn't quite like that, and maybe your past experience also isn't like that? The stadium and just seeing it must have been awe-inspiring, to say the least.
It was a bit surreal. A lot of the time, which was so when we arrived, people recognized Soaz, which was great. And obviously he is a fantastically big League of Legends star, effectively, in the world.
Yeah.
But they just assumed I was also famous, and just kind of went like, "Oh, picture," and I was like, "You don't, I don't, I'm not famous, dude. Like, you don't want my picture." They're like, "No, picture." And I was just very surreal. I'd never had someone ask for my picture taken. Apart from, I think it was Worlds 2015 quarterfinals, where myself and my friends wore bin bags to London with the NA logos on them, and we were the NA trash cosplayers. That was the only time I've ever had people take my photos. So it was surreal. There's definitely a much different. It's a much broader culture, I would say. Like, there's definitely a lot more people within the Chinese League of Legends community comparatively to, say, Europe or even NA. And they're very, they're more on the personalities of the players, and they will follow a player to the end of the world. So like if Uzi left RNG and went to IG, hypothetically speaking, they would just all pick up and move. That's just how they do things. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's very like what I would say that if Europe is like Premier League or like football, where you kind of stay with your team regardless of who's there, I would say China's a bit more like Formula One, where you follow the drivers and you kind of go like, oh, well, Hamilton's now with, Mercedes. I'm going over to Mercedes now, or he's now with McLaren. I'm going to go with McLaren. And you kind of stick with that kind of stuff. I think they're a lot more intense, and they can be a lot more, if you kind of make a criticism of their favorite player, they will come at you, and they're very passionate. That's the best way I can put it.
I suppose there's pros and cons to the passion, isn't there, really? But obviously you have been watching LPL teams play, and I'm sure you had to do a bunch of homework before coming to host and casting the LPL. But like last year, some of the teams look really, really strong going into Worlds, and this is sort of the last topic that I wanted to chat to you about. What are your thoughts, predictions for the LPL specifically going into Worlds then?
I think IG are gonna bomb. I don't think they're gonna do well at all. Everyone keeps like hyping them up and being like, oh this, oh that, and like they're still IG, and I'm like, they're not though. They're really, really not. I will be pleasantly surprised if they do pop themselves off and kind of get themselves back into Worlds form. But I'm very, very unconvinced. They got 3-0'd in their playoffs, and they barely scraped through 2 5-game series to Gauntlet to get themselves into the World Finals or the World Championships. I don't think they'll do very well at all. I think FBX will probably win the whole thing. I think FBX, no one really rates them right now. Well, they rate them, but not super highly. Everyone still kind of says G2 and SKT. I think FBX are terrifying. They're one of the few teams that I would look at and kind of say they could dismantle SKT and G2 by playing their own games against them, and just really take it to them. I think if G2 beat FBX, G2 win the whole thing, but obviously we'll have to see how quarterfinals goes. But FBX are terrifying. They'll be top 2 minimum, and if they're not, I'd be disappointed in them. And for RNG are always RNG. They haven't really changed how they play the game or what they do, but they play it so well, and they play it in such a way that people just can't seem to find a solution to it. It's like, oh, they just play bot lane focus. It's like, yeah, but you can't beat it, so there's no reason to change. Yeah, like people, they don't really know how to change it. So I think they'll do well. I think it'd be good if they made semis. I don't think they'll make it much further. I think the likes of G2 and SKT should be able to take them down. But yeah, I think my top 4 would be RNG, G2, SKT, and FPX. I think that would be my top 4. But I think I'd be very surprised if we didn't see 2 LPL teams in the top 4.
Yeah, maybe FPX are a little bit like G2 in this sense, where a lot of European fans are still like, have we actually seen G2? Like, do we actually know what they're like?
Yeah.
Finals, and they've played 2 series against Fnatic. It felt like at any moment G2 could just sort of brush them off and be done with it all. I wonder if FPX have felt a little bit like that for LPL fans as well.
A little bit. Like they were super dominant in the regular season, and then only dropped like a game or a series throughout the whole split, and then went 3-1 against Billy, and then went 3-1 in the finals against RNG. Like these guys, like they very rarely did it look like they were struggling or kind of like, struggling to find answers. And as I always kind of look towards G2 versus Fnatic, where it was an incredibly close series and super exciting, and obviously G2 win. They're still on the golden road, which as an EU fan, I would hope they are able to do it. But it's very difficult for me to kind of look past like how good some of these LPL teams are and just how dominating FPX was. And I don't think people give a lot of credit to that, because I think it's also down to a lot of people don't watch a lot of LPL, and I think the history of LCK having being the best region is always going to be there. And it's only going to be the strongest narrative going in. So it'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see. I'm very curious to see if LCK can do better than they did last year.
Yeah, super. I hope so. What I really want to see personally is the most interesting, most fun tournament. And however that comes out, I'm super happy, to be honest with you.
Same. Entertaining games.
No, that's perfect. Look, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for your time again, because we have got through all of the topics that I wanted to chat to you about today. So I really appreciate your insight and your openness to talk about all the different things. So thank you very much for your time, man.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. Well, the last question, and this is the same question I asked to everyone, same spiel every time. We've had so many different answers to this, whether it's quotes, book recommendations, anything to do with that sort of stuff. And the question is, what is one thing that you can teach me or the viewers from your world? So you can take some time to have a little think about it, because I know that's a bit of a question. But if there's anything that springs to mind, I'd love to hear it.
I have 2 things. I have 2. One's a small one, and one's a slightly. I can kind of build up on that. Within casting, take care of your voice. Honey lemon tea is your best friend. And always be driving forward. And I think the second bit for me is never get complacent. Never think that you're better or good enough than anybody else in the world, because there is always going to be someone hungrier, more driven, more likely to push themselves to a point where, you know, they kind of like get that. And I've seen it a couple of times I did it myself a couple of times, where you kind of just get very happy in your little, you know, kind of setup, and you're like, oh, I'm doing great. And then your standard drops, you're kind of not as good as you thought you were. Some up and coming caster who is putting in the work and the effort and the time is just pushing themselves forward. So like we were saying earlier, the amount of work that Papa Smithy and Frosker and goes put into their days and the prep and everything for one cast is there for a reason. So I think if I was to teach someone something, is that if you're looking for, you know, a career as such in casting, fantastic, delighted to see you guys, you know, go for that, but never get complacent and always be working on your craft. That's probably the best advice or something I could teach them.
No, I really like that. I think that sort of resonates with every craft. It's not just casting, as you say. Work on your craft, I think, is something that you should try and do 24/7 pretty much. So I really like that. No, thank you very much. Perfect. That was pretty much everything that I wanted to talk to you about, as I said. If people do want to get in contact with you, they want to follow you, they want to find you, maybe you stream, something like that, where is the best place that people can get in contact?
At BPcasts on Twitter, I think on Instagram, and I think on Twitch as well. I think I'm pretty much BPcasts on absolutely everything.
You secured that name. Well, if you do want to get in contact with BP, all of the links will be in the description as usual. Firstly, I do want to say again, thank you an awful lot for coming on and giving your time and all of the insight. I think that was amazing. And I hope everyone at home has really enjoyed watching and listening to this episode. So thank you very much, BP, for your time, and we will catch you on the next episode.